Okay, so I'm Christopher Malouf. I've been contacting you for the past 2-3 weeks. So I'm a fourth-year architecture student here at Alba in Beirut. It's an honor for the School of Architecture to launch this year's student lecture series with such an important figure in the architecture avant-garde scene as Mark Foster Gage. I'd like to start by thanking you for accepting to lecture virtually here at Alba with us today. It's a great pleasure to have you with us after your work in philosophy has been given numerous times as a reference at the school. I'd like to also thank Mr. Mark Abi Rashid, the administration and everyone involved for making the lecture possible, despite the very complex circumstances in Beirut at the moment. It's a very difficult task to compress who and what Mark Foster Gage is in a few sentences. He's an architect, writer, theorist, academic, artist, a truly multidisciplinary architect. His academic expertise in the field of aesthetic philosophy, currently focusing on the built environment impact issues of social equality. He has been an associate professor at the Yale School of Architecture since 2001, focusing on the relationship between aesthetics and design, in addition to being assistant dean from 2009 to 2019. He is the founder of Mark Foster Gage Architects in New York since 2002, in which he has generated a hybrid architectural design thesis by combining contemporary philosophical notions with the most advanced technology through a very speculative and experimental creative process. Being classically trained in a Beaux-Arts curriculum, Mark Foster Gage joins his expertise and appreciation for the historical aspect of architecture with emerging contemporary innovation, leading to a very unique creative practice in opposition to the more conventional, corporate, redundant production today. Being a proponent and advocate of the speculative realism philosophical movement, in addition to the object-oriented ontology, his interests in aesthetics and ornament are mostly expressed through the means of kit-bashing figurative iconographic elements in high resolution, leading to an alternative architectural production. Constantly re-questioning the virtual physical architectural boundaries, Mark Foster Gage has created numerous artifacts that are situated deeply into this discourse, going back and forth between these metaphysical statuses. This deeply experimental speculative discipline has led the production to be exhibited and showcased in the most prestigious platforms internationally, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of the Art Institute of Chicago, the Royal Academy of Art in London Academy, the Royal Danish Academy Gallery, the National Gallery of Art in Japan, the Fractals Center in Orléans, the France Mayer Museum in Mexico City, and the Venice, Beijing, and Prague Biennales, to name a few. Mark Foster Gage is also the author of multiple books and essays, including a comprehensive monograph on his work and writings titled Mark Foster Gage, Projects and Provocations, published by Rizzoli Press in 2018, Designing Social Equality, Architecture, Aesthetics, and the Perception of Democracy, and then as an editor has published Aesthetics Equal Politics, New Discourses Across Art, Architecture and Philosophy, Aesthetic Theory, Essential Texts for Architecture and Design and Composites, Surfaces and Software, High Performance Architecture, co-edited with Greg Lynn, to name a few of the very diverse publication repertoire. Through fusing his interests in architecture, design theory, and philosophy and technology, Gage has produced pioneering projects for clients including Intel Corporation, Nicola Formichetti, Lady Gaga, Google, Diesel, H&M, Samsung, and Vice Media, among a very big list of collaborators. The work has been extensively featured in the most major architectural publications internationally. Thank you again for being with us, Mr. Gage, today, and the stage or screen is yours. Thank you.
Great. It's my pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So if I cut out, just let me know, or if if there's any technical problems. But otherwise, I'm just gonna share my screen here. So can you all see a white slide? Christopher? Yeah, okay. Is that a thumbs up?
Yes, yes.
Okay, got it. Great. No technical difficulties so far. That's always some accomplishment in our world of Zoom. So it's great to be with you virtually. I honestly really wish I could be in Beirut. I've been to not quite 100 countries, but never been able to visit Lebanon. So it's on my list, and I'd like to get to you as soon as, you know, the world returns to a kind of better state. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to speak a little bit about some of my ideas within architecture, some of my writing, and then I'm going to show a bunch of work. And I'm not going to go too deeply into the work because you can find that information elsewhere, but I do want to talk about how that work ties into the ideas that I'm going to be presenting. And these are ideas that I'm thinking about now. So they're kind of in development. So if you find any inconsistencies in my thinking, don't tell me about it. The worst part about Zoom lectures is you can't see whether or not people are laughing, and you're all wearing masks. So every time I try to say something funny, it just, it just looks like it just totally falls flat. So we all laugh with our hands or something. Yeah, there you go. So I wanted to start with this graph, which is something I came across a couple of years ago, and it just, I mean, it kind of freaked me out, but I also kind of found it amazing. And it shows the population. This is from the United Nations. It shows we're somewhere around between, you know, 2000, 2050. And in 2016, that was a pivotal moment in human history, not only because Donald Trump was elected in the United States, which was a very, let's say, bad development in human history, but it was the first year in human history where more humans lived in urban environments than rural environments. So that's a kind of amazing thing. When you were alive, that was the tipping point when more humans lived in cities than lived in rural environments. And as you can see from this graph, that's just going to continue to grow. So by the time it's 2050, I'll probably be dead by then. But it looks like about a third of humanity is going to live in rural environments and 2/3 of humanity is going to live in urban environments. So that means it's an exciting time to be an architect, because what are urban environments defined by? They're defined by architecture. So if we look at this in a broader philosophical spectrum, it means that architecture is changing its very definition. Architecture is no longer building enclosures to protect us from nature. Architecture has become, in a sense, larger and more important than nature in terms of what humanity engages on a day-to-day basis. So architecture is starting to become a discipline that defines the background of human reality for the majority of humanity. And as you can see in the chart, that trend is only going to continue. So what that means is, as of 2016, when most of humanity walks out their front door, what they're seeing is not rural nature, but what they're seeing is architecture. And that means that architecture could be defined as of 2016 as the discipline that creates the physical framework of human reality. So next time you're on an airplane and someone asks what you do, you can say, I'm an architect, I produce human reality. You probably wouldn't be too far off of the mark. Now, this presents a problem because it means, according to this chart, we have a lot of architecture to build. And my worry and my fear is that most of that architecture is going to be driven only by economics. And that produces what turns out to be pretty bad architecture for humanity. So a lot of my work is trying to think about how architecture can play a bigger role in human culture, and in a sense, combat that trend whereby architecture only responds to economic needs, which is, of course, capitalism. Now, this is a sketch by Leon Creer, who's an architect and a friend of mine. I actually taught a studio with Leon Creer at Yale a number of years ago. But this drawing pretty much sums it up, is that there's maybe a little bit of architecture and then just a whole lot of repetition. And it's that repetition, that kind of like unthought through repetition, which is defining our urban environments these days. And I just came across a project that I want to share with you that you may or may not have heard about or seen. But I think this is kind of a paradigmatic example of what happens when economy, and only economy, drives architecture. Now, what's kind of pathetic about this building is that it has like, some classical details and it has some aspirations to be architecture. But this is a dormitory that's proposed to be built at the University of California at Santa Barbara. It's called Munger Hall. And each floor of Munger Hall houses 500 students. And there's 11 floors, which means that this building will hold about 5,500 students. Let's say 6,000 students to round up. The floor plan of Munger Hall is this in the upper right. And you can see each of these is a little cell. Each of these little blocks is a little cell where each student gets their own room. That room opens up to a kitchen and a kind of large study table or dining table, but there's no windows in the entire suite. So each of these little boxes is a room, and the only windows are on the edge. Now, this should terrify all architects because it means students who are in an environment that's supposed to be conducive to learning are, because of economic needs, being treated essentially like prisoners. And I can't imagine any of you would be very excited about going to your first day of college and finding out your room is one room, one hallway, and another room probably 100 feet away from a window. It's a little terrifying. And the fact that this is legal in the United States is equally terrifying. So there's been a lot of protest about this building, but the donor says that he'll only build the building if it's built in the way he's designed it, which is essentially like this. So that's terrifying for a number of reasons, but most of all, that it means that the economics of architectural construction are almost fully overtaking in this building architecture's responsibility as a cultural enterprise. The other aspect of that is urbanism, and I just got a little cooped up because of COVID, and I'm sure you're feeling the same way, but I took my motorcycle across the United States over 3 weeks, about 6,500 kilometers. This is the route I took. And one of the things that I was looking at was, of course, some of America's beautiful nature, but also the state of urbanism within American culture. And the same thing that's happening in architecture, that kind of efficiency is overriding cultural values, is also happening in our landscape. So this is the path I took. And of course, there's a lot of beauty. This is just me on my motorcycle snapping off pictures at the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, Yosemite National Park in California, the Badlands in South Dakota, and I think this might have been in Yellowstone National Park. So there's a lot of beauty in the United States, but most of the United States looks like this, which is to say an quote unquote urban environment defined by strip malls, freestanding architecture, really more about signage than buildings. But the way the United States is expanding is almost exclusively in this vein. So this is a purely economic vein because Taco Bell and McDonald's want to have as much profit as possible. They buy cheap plots of land that are far from urban downtown areas, and they, cater to cars and parking lots. So each building is surrounded by a sea of parking, which means you never get buildings close to each other, which means you never get density, which never means you never get, a kind of, I would say, cosmopolitan urban environment like you would find in Beirut or New York City. And 99% of the architecture that's being built in the United States is being built like this and the suburban equivalent, which is also houses just placed very far apart. So the state of architecture in the emerging 21st century is aiming towards, or let's say gliding towards, economic efficiency to greater and greater degrees. And I think architects have the responsibility to try to combat that in some sense. So as Christopher mentioned earlier, I have some affiliations with the world of philosophy, most notably through a movement called speculative realism and the work of Graham Harman, who is shown here in the middle next to me. Graham Harman is a philosopher. He was just put on a list as one of the 10 most important philosophers of the last 10 years globally. And I'm just going to present one idea from his philosophy today that I find particularly interesting. There are many more, and you can read more about my dialogues with him. There's some YouTube videos of me and him talking. But we become friends, and that dialogue between architecture and philosophy is something which has been very, very fruitful in my life, to the point where Graham Harman and I taught a design studio at Yale about right before COVID, and it was about the architecture of thought. So we took our students to Tibet. This is an image in the upper right of our studio in Tibet, where we spent about a week going around Tibet looking at Buddhist monasteries as building types which are solely dedicated to thinking and meditation. There aren't many building types solely dedicated to thought, but Buddhist monasteries are one of them. So we spent a week talking philosophy, driving around with our students, and thinking about that relationship between architecture and thinking, which is also something I want to talk about. So in order to think about architecture, we have to notice it, right? And we don't really notice architecture in this type of environment. And certainly if you were driving around the streets of Santa Barbara, you wouldn't notice this piece of architecture. You wouldn't pull out your camera, you wouldn't engage with it. One thing I didn't mention is that this building with 5,500 students in a single building is the same size as Yale University, which is where I teach, which also has about 5,500 students. So the same amount of students that are housed at Yale University, this is a photo of Yale University, are all housed in a single building at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Now, the one thing I want to talk about, and the reason I called this talk the architecture of high resolution, is that there's an idea within Graham Harman's philosophy, which he has called object-oriented ontology, which you may or may not brush up against in theory classes, but it's a contemporary philosophical position. And one of the interesting aspects of it, of many interesting aspects, is what Graham proposes is this analogy of a hammer, which is an idea that was also emerged in Heidegger's writing in the early to mid 20th century, but Graham Harman really kind of changed the way we think about Heidegger's work. So in the analogy of the hammer, if you're swinging a hammer and making a bench or whatever, the hammer, because it's functioning perfectly, becomes invisible to your attention. You don't notice it. In the same way that right now, all of you are sitting on a chair, and you probably haven't thought about that chair since you sat down on it. If I asked you to describe the aesthetic qualities of that chair without looking, you might be able to give me its color, but you probably don't know a whole lot about that chair. And the reason is because it's functioning as it's supposed to. And Harman and Heidegger say that when something is functioning as it's supposed to, it becomes an invisible layer of background equipment and is not noticed by your consciousness. So, for instance, I'm drinking a cup of coffee, and this cup of coffee that you can't see, or maybe you can see, I haven't thought about that coffee. I haven't noticed it as an object because it's functioning perfectly. However, as in the lower left image, when that hammer breaks, it comes to the foreground of our attention. So if I'm swinging a hammer and I hit a nail and the hammer breaks, all of a sudden I look at the hammer and I'm like, what the hell happened to the hammer? I look at where it broke. I wonder why it broke. And in doing so, I also notice its materiality and its color and its texture. It becomes to the foreground of my attention when it breaks. So this analogy tells us that objects in the world have the ability to either be invisible to us or come to the foreground of our attention. Now, I want you to think of let's call it the number one slogan of modern architecture, which is form follows function. If form follows function and architecture looks like what it's supposed to do, that makes architecture invisible to our consciousness. So a century of producing architecture within the modern modernist, let's say, style or modern means of production, where form follows function, means that architects have been for a century producing architecture that is supposed to be invisible background equipment to human consciousness. And if something is invisible, you don't pay attention to it and you don't care for it, which is why we get this situation. Architecture, of course, has a dilemma, which is you can't just go around breaking architecture to get it noticed, right? There was some movement towards this in the kind of architectural movement of deconstruction, where they challenged how an architectural building could function. But an option for making architecture not function, I would say, isn't a good way to get architecture noticed. That there are other tools that we can use to get architecture to move from the background of our attention to the foreground of our attention. And one of those tools I've been interested in is resolution. That we're used to seeing architecture at a certain resolution. But if we change that resolution and show it in much higher resolution than it has typically been granted within history, that may be one way that architecture moves from that background of invisible equipment to the foreground of our attention and becomes something which is noticed and cared for and designed. So this is just an image of a flower in low res and high res, but I'm going to be showing a lot of work, and the goal of all of this work from the last 10 years has really been about trying to find ways to bring architecture to the foreground of your attention from that background. Resolution is something I've been working with for about a year or two now. So I'm going to start with a couple earlier projects in a second, but I did want to make a quick comment that relationship between architecture and reality, that architecture is defining reality, isn't actually new to architecture, and that within architecture there is a history of doing very weird things in architecture to bring it to the foreground of your attention and the foreground of your perception of reality. So if you look at something not too far from where you are, I think even in the same time zone, the Parthenon, you all probably know from your architectural history courses that there isn't a right angle in the entire Parthenon. The Parthenon is bent with what they're called optical corrections. So the entire base of the Parthenon is actually a thinly sliced piece of a sphere. It actually bends in two directions. The columns are spaced differently on the end. The entire facade leans out slightly. The reason for this is that they wanted the building to look more perfect than it did had you not done these optical corrections. So already 2,000 years ago, architects are tweaking architecture to make it look a certain way that changes our perception of it within reality and makes it noticed and noticeable as something special against that reality. It also happens within Vitruvius, our first source of architectural theory in the Roman Empire, where he gives us an analogy of an ore. And the whole book is about the laws of classicism. This is how you build architecture. This has to be certain proportions. And at a certain point, he says, yes, you need to follow all these rules of classical architecture, but we know that the human eye is fallible. So he gives the analogy that when you stick an oar in water and you're rowing a boat, that the ore will look broken to the human eye. Same thing happens if you stick a pencil in a cup of water. The pencil looks like it's broken to the human eye. In Vitruvius's mind, that meant there's something wrong with the human eye. And he gives architects permission to change the rules of classicism to correct the eye's inability to see reality properly. He also says one of the most important things for architects is to know the philosophies of the age. So very early on in architecture, there's a relationship between reality, philosophy, architecture, and trying to change architecture to be more apparent within that background of human reality. Brunelleschi, the first architect of the Italian Renaissance, also did that through discovering perspective drawing. So he did a famous experiment with a series of mirrors and paintings of the Duomo in front of the the baptistry in Florence. He was the architect of the Duomo at the time, 1421, and he basically kind of figured out the laws of perspective and how to draw things. And what that did was it allowed architects to predict the appearance of reality before that reality was built. So we think of perspective as, just a way of drawing things and how they're going to look. But if you think of it as the ability to perceive what a building will look like in reality prior to that reality existing, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And because it was so powerful, it created what we call the Italian Renaissance, and the Renaissance that flourished throughout Europe. And even your school is, the École des Beaux-Arts, which is the school of, and essentially the arts, the beautiful arts, which were defined in the Renaissance. That whole idea of Beaux-Arts is something that emerges from the Renaissance, the late Renaissance. So what that does, that change in our ability to perceive and predict reality, means that in the 13th, 14th, early, let's say mid 1300s, if you were asked to draw a cylinder, someone would draw it like this, because a cylinder is two circles with lines connecting it. But very little attention was given to the third dimension, which is depth. This is actually a painting of Florence from around 1350. And you can see the baptistry here. It was before the Duomo was built. But you can see there's no depth in this painting, because it wasn't the job of humans to understand reality in the 13th century, 14th century. It was really only God's job to understand reality. So human drawing made no attempt to understand reality as something which has representational depth. Until after the Renaissance, only 100 years later, 100 years after this, you get this drawing by Uccello, which is the world's first wireframe. And you can see the incredible understanding of geometry and depth, which happens over 100 years, to the point where this is a painting 100 years after this. And you start to get a painting with depth. You recognize the Duomo has been constructed, and you start to see that infiltration and perspective into the art of architecture. Now, the point of this isn't to give you a lecture on the Renaissance, but just to say that relationship between reality and perception has been historically very, very powerful within architecture, to the point that it prompted one of the most important urban and architectural movements in human history, which is to say the Renaissance, which gives us the great capitals of Europe, of which Beirut is largely modeled after. Some of the most beautiful and livable cities on the planet were cities that emerged from this tradition of architects taking the control of the perception of reality into their own hands. Christopher already mentioned a bunch of my books. I've been trying to get at this relationship. That relationship between architecture, perception, and reality in philosophy is called aesthetics. It's the most recent branch of philosophy. I do a lot of writing on aesthetics. Object-oriented ontology is entirely an aesthetic-based philosophy. So almost all of my writings have something to do with aesthetic philosophy. But just think of aesthetics as the branch of philosophy that deals with perception between the human mind and the reality outside of that mind. And architecture for the last century has had no relationship to aesthetic discourse in philosophy, because form was supposed to follow function, so aesthetics were bad. I've been trying to reintroduce aesthetic thought into architectural theory and architectural practice for about 20 years now. So how has my office tried to bring architecture to the foreground of human attention? We've done a lot of experiments in different projects over the years. I'm going to show you some starting off with technology, where we're interested in making architecture talk back. This is a pavilion for the Coachella Music Festival in California for the clothing company H&M, where we have a lot of interactive aspects to the architecture. So you push on walls, they change color, they do things that architecture isn't supposed to do. This is an installation. We did 5 of these around the world for Intel Corporation in Singapore, Hong Kong, San Francisco, New York, London, and Paris, so maybe 6 or 7. But when you interacted with this laptop underneath, the colors of this construct above would change. And again, it's the idea of trying to link human tactility to architecture to get us to notice architecture. We've done some work with VR. We've done some stores for the company Diesel. This one is a store we did for Diesel in Brooklyn, which thinks about how screens and screen technology can be used as a form of lighting. We did a series of stores in China and the US for Nicola Formichetti and Lady Gaga. This is one of those stores where the walls changed color as you got close to them. So there was an interactivity between lighting and the human body. Part of the store was dedicated to an exhibition of Lady Gaga's outfits. So these are a bunch of her outfits. This was the store in Hong Kong. The one in the middle is actually an outfit that I designed with her and with Nicola Formichetti. We also did, this is a construction photo of the world's, let's see, the largest virtual reality gaming center in the Western Hemisphere, which is here in New York. It has projection mapping on this giant object. So over the course of an hour, this object with these different projections changes and reconfigures and takes on different qualities of materiality. The lighting of the entire environment changes. So nothing in the environment is static. It's always changing. So when you put on your iPhones and play a game, when you take them off, the room is an entirely different color. The object in the middle has entirely different materiality. Again, trying to change that expectation of what the building looks like as you experience it. It's not, I'm sorry, it's an interior space, not a building. So these are some of the different settings. Over the course of the day, it just slowly changes and morphs from different colors and lighting effects and senses of materiality. So this is actually an object with all these different facets, and here it's being projected on with a kind of icy texture that makes it look like an iceberg or something. It's about 8 projectors that are all coordinated to projection map this thing. I also did another store for Nicola Formichetti and Lady Gaga in New York City that was all based on mirrors and facets. And the idea was to basically fuse fashion and architecture into a single discipline. So you couldn't tell where the fashion stopped and the architecture began, which I think was somewhat successful. In that the photographer from Vogue magazine told us that it was the most beautiful retail space he'd ever been in, that it was almost impossible to take a photograph because the light always reflected around. There's no place for the light to rest. So it was a really interesting environment. These are some of the different close-ups of the different lighting configurations. Again, more of Lady Gaga's outfits at the back. This is the one she wore in her telephone video, if you're a Lady Gaga fan. I'm going to show a really short video here that just shows that store in action. Now, it's supposed to have audio, so maybe Chris, you can give me a thumb up or a thumbs down if the audio is showing up. Are you getting the video? Can you guys wave if you're getting the video? I mean the audio. You getting audio? Okay.
But they're asking, a lot of questions of whoever is Lady Gaga, which is just a name to me. A lot of because everybody wants to see the fashion, and people want to see this fella named Rico, the fella with the tattoo. Everybody wants to see him.
All right, so I'm going to shift gears here a little bit and go into a different when I started thinking about resolution, uh, the way my office started, I just wanted I just wanted high resolution, and I told the people in my office, I said, I just want you to go find, some really complex objects and start to combine them into really, really, really complex forms. And these are some of the early objects that we created. We gave it a stone texture so it looked like architecture, but we were really just downloading objects. This is what Christopher referred to as kit bashing. The first project we tried it on was for the Helsinki Guggenheim. This is the bay of Helsinki, and this is our building. And basically the strategy was just to make the highest resolution building we could, and to do so just by combining objects. To me, it didn't really matter what the objects were. I just wanted the effect of high resolution to get the architecture to stand out from what you would normally consider architecture. And I was reading object-oriented ontology at the time with Graham Harman, and it talks about the ability for objects to be independent of one another. So this was Patrick Schumacher from Zaha Hadid's office, and I have had a kind of debate where he's been pro a position called parametricism, which is all about the linkages between different, panels and windows. So if you change a panel over here, the panel over here updates, and it's all about interconnectivity. So I wanted to do something that was the opposite of that, a building that was not at all about interconnectivity, where each piece of the building is an individual object and has no relationship with any other object in the building, symbolically or otherwise. This also, I should say, was a philosophical exercise done through architecture. So this isn't me thinking that the whole world should look like this. This is me experimenting with a new set of ideas within architecture to see what would happen. It's interesting that this is Arata Isozaki giving a lecture of his own work in Tokyo. And I was very pleased to see that he was showing my work, and over the front of it, it says weird with exclamation marks. So I suppose it's good to get noticed by Arata Isozaki and have Arata Isozaki lecture about my work. And the point of the building was, in a sense, to be weird. It was to challenge our expectations of what architecture was through resolution, to bring architecture to the foreground of people's attention. And I guess somehow it came to the foreground of Arata Isozaki's attention, which made him labeled it as weird. But the fact that he noticed it at all was the entire point. We used this strategy of kit bashing to do an outfit for Lady Gaga. The original idea was to do it of 3D printed faces of her fans, but because of rights and a whole host of issues, we ended up only being able to use her face, and we only had the time to 3D print a couple of masks. So we scanned Lady Gaga's face. These are her faces coming out of the 3D printer, fully colored, a little freaky. And we made this shoulder piece where she's wearing herself. So you can see the 3D print of her face next to her actual face on this harness that she's wearing. And the harness is asymmetrical, and the wings in the video that she was in are these symmetrical drapes we designed, which are symmetrical, which is obviously something you can't do without the aid of computers. So this outfit was featured in her Viva Glam video. We also used that strategy in a company that we've been involved with called Nico Panda, where we were doing things with objects, much like the Helsinki project, and materials. So we made a line of these backpacks and iPad holders and little wallets and purses that all use kind of randomly chosen materials to generate these really strange, funky color and texture effects. The company called Nico Panda, so everything was kind of panda themed. We did these sunglasses. We designed an iPhone case with all these little pandas, challenging our idea that an iPhone case is just this boring thing, that's totally minimal. What if it was an object that you actually cared for and paid attention to? In the middle lower image, we designed sunglasses that made you look like a panda. So instead of just putting a panda on it, we actually designed it so the sunglass lens turned into these giant ears. This didn't go into production, but a lot of the sunglasses and stuff did. We also did product design for MAC Cosmetics. These were sold worldwide and also have the kind of like panda theme. We're embedding the panda into the makeup itself and doing some kind of innovative things. And we use that strategy, to this day to produce some things like these vases. This is my office in New York City. These vases were something we were doing for Miami Art Basel right before the coronavirus hit. But you can see we're kind of combining different objects at different scales. We're testing different materials. These are all rotocast with a recycled plastic. So they're hollow inside, they're not solid. But working with different colors, different materialities, different textures, trying to get these things into the real world. These are some of the finished products that you can buy if you'd like to, through a gallery, although they're rather expensive, coming in at about $5,000 to $8,000 each. We've used these resolution strategies on building proposals. This is a building not far from my apartment in New York City, which is on Bond Street, looking at ways of thinking about building panels as not flat. So these are just concrete panels, but they would be cast in molds that have really high degree of detail. And all of this detail is, somehow New York related, because the building is in New York. I won't go in and tell you about it. But the idea was just to develop a new form of relief that wasn't like hand carved or anything. It was just cast concrete, just like half of the other buildings being constructed in Manhattan. We started a different strategy with kit bashing and resolution on this project, which is our tower on West 57th Street, where we started abstracting the objects and stretching them. We wanted to do a project where the objects gave us their high resolution, but weren't recognizable as individual objects. So you wouldn't look at this building and see toasters and teddy bears, but you would see objects at high resolution and not know what they were, which would make you want to look at them further. So this building got a lot of press. I'm not sure if it got any attention in Beirut, but it was, it was just, it was basically the same size as Raphael Vignoli's building here. And these are some of the details. Halfway up, it has these giant balconies and these wings. But you can see going up the building, it has all of this detail that emerges from these different objects, but you shouldn't really be able to tell what the objects are. And the idea was, can we add detail back into high-rise buildings in a way that it had been in buildings in the past, like the Empire State Building or the Chrysler Building, but can we do it with curtain walls? So most of this building is actually a curtain wall with these areas of stone just laid in front of the curtain wall. So it wasn't saying that the entire building needed to be carved out of a single piece of solid stone. It was saying that we can use curtain wall technologies and try to integrate higher resolution aspects of a building to bring it to the foreground of the users' and viewers' attention. And certainly a building this tall would have a lot of viewers. These are some sketches we did with a concept artist named Patrick Fallwetter that show the entrance of the building, the grand stair, and the grand internal lobby, using some of the same strategies. This is a video which I'm going to let play. It's about 2 minutes long, but it's going to take you up the entire length of the building. So in that project, you can see the ambition is to work with a high resolution that doesn't have the symbolism of the early kit bashing. I'm going to shift gears and show you a kind of different strategy on how to use some of these techniques we were developing. We were asked by New York Magazine to imagine New York City in the year 2050, and we were selected as one of 5 architects. It was Norman Foster's office and Diller and Scafidio, and I can't remember the other 2. But we decided to address climate change, and by 2050, New York City will almost certainly be flooded multiple times. And the major problem of our flooding is in the East River. So we have the Hudson River on the left and the East River on the right. And the blue areas are the areas which are all in danger of being flooded because of rising, ocean levels. So as our solution to solving the flooding problem of the East River, we rejected the idea that it would just build a really tall wall all the way around the coastline, and just decided to drain the entire East River and make a fertile valley where you could grow, crops and have parks. And then we would have giant geothermal vents to power the city, which would be drilled down deep into the crust of the earth to get the power. So this is one dam that's just stopping all the water, and then allowing the riverbed to become this kind of green parkscape for, like I said, growing food, but also recreation. And we designed these geothermal vents are here, but we also designed along the edge of the park what we called vertical parks as a way to get from the city down to this lower level. And to do those vertical parks, we also used a kind of a high resolution circulation. So you could imagine we could just put stairs that go back and forth, and those would not come to the foreground of your attention. But we wanted to make that circulation experience getting from the city down to this lower valley level an experience worth noticing, an experience worth having. So we designed these vertical parks where you would do things like go downstairs, turn around, go down some more stairs, go through a little room, go down some stairs inside, pop out an outdoor room, go down some more stairs. So the entire journey was something that wasn't repetitive, which is, again, the opposite of that dormitory I showed you at the beginning, which is all about repetition. So a lot of our work, like the skyscraper, while as repetitive floor plates, is fighting against that repetition of economy to, again, bring architecture to the foreground of your attention. We have a summer park here on the right, where you can see lots of green is grown here on this tower element. We have a winter park here on the left, where there's just a big tube and it would dribble water out, and the tube would be chilled to freeze into a kind of giant ice sculpture. So you would circulate down and around this giant ice sculpture during the winter. Another strategy we've been using to test ideas of resolution is through fractals. We've been working and developing some fractal geometry software programs that are recursive. So you see one thing at one scale, but with fractals, when you zoom in more, you see something different. You zoom in more, you see something different. I mean, it's the whole definition of a fractal. So this was our first project that used fractal geometries. It's for our Center for Science and Innovation in Kaunas, Lithuania. And you can see the kind of fractal languages, that it has fractal languages happening at far away. But as you get closer to the building, you notice those fractal languages are even imprinted into the panels of the building. So we have multiple scales of resolution happening within architecture, which is the opposite of what happens with a glass modernist box. You see a grid from far away and you see a grid from close up. So in this project, we're trying to challenge that idea of resolution through multiple scales, not through multiple objects. Just another form of research in this ongoing theme of resolution. So you can see the scale of a person here entering this very tall and thin entrance to the museum. It's a museum of science and technology, so we liked the idea that fractals looked very mathematical. It, had windows and rooms. Each of these building masses has like terraces. These are the railings for the upper terraces. But when you go into this main space, you're confronted with a large, very thin but very vertical atrium, which also uses cast in place concrete, but does so with these fractal languages. So here you get very thin ribbing on the concrete, which is very similar to the architecture building where I teach at Yale University by Paul Rudolph. It's kind of a fractal brutalism, a brutalism that has really high levels of detail that are stretched and pulled to accentuate the verticality. So each one of these is a floor. So this floor, you can see access to the atrium from this side, but it has no access from this side. This floor has large access to the atrium through these giant kind of balcony structures. This floor, again, has no access. So as you're going through the floors of the building, you're experiencing this very thin, tall atrium in very different ways from very different angles. We've also taken that strategy down to smaller scales. This is a project which is actually going to start construction in a couple months for a small private library annex in England, on the border of Wales. This is a house which was built in 1521 called Penkridge Hall, and we were asked to do a small library annex on this very small plot of land. And the building is on a plot of land that was the site of a 12th century Templar chapel, and this building itself was built in 1521, so it has a very rich history. So we have to go through all these approvals processes all the way up to the national level. But we were told it needed to look, because it was at the site of a Templar chapel, it should look kind of temple-y, but not look like a religious building. And it should also look Tudor, like this building. This Tudor has these diagonals. So we were, in a sense, given the impossible problem of trying to produce a building which looked sort of chapel-y and sort of Tudor and contemporary, but was built out of masonry construction. And this is what we came up with. Building a version of this is being built that has a lot more brick integrated into it, but this was our original design with the client. And you can see that it picks up some of that diagonality from the Tudor. It has a kind of Gothic massing, but it doesn't have Gothic detail. So it should be a confusing building to the architectural mind because it's referencing multiple histories. So this was our first attempt at really using history as a way to develop higher resolution architecture. This is the interior, and you can see the scale. It's just a living room with a kind of sleeping loft and a bunch of books. We also did another project using that kind of fractal language, which was in France, which won't be built, but just shows it's a very small guest house with a tiny kitchen and living area here, bathroom, and a single bedroom, all packed into this little guest house, which is on this very large estate that has a historic chateau on it. So this was intended to be an object in a garden, but also a place where guests could stay. So that's why it's kind of designed like its own little sculptural self-contained object. Another strategy was kind of using these details at different scales for a house in the woods in Ile René Lavassieur in Quebec in Canada, which is deep in this forest. So we did this concept drawing which showed this building as a ruin. We wanted this building to take on the appearance of the ruin. So we designed all these shelves where plants could grab onto and grow. The window frames are all bronze, so vines could climb up these textural areas. But the building was intended to take on this kind of ruinous quality through the use of these more high resolution details. So high resolution isn't just something to look at, it's something for plants to grow on in this case, which gives its own kind of aesthetic qualities. This was the interior, which was intended to be like a single cave. So the building is basically just one giant room with a sleeping loft, a small pool area. It's basically meant to entertain guests in giant parties. We have a flowing mini river along the side with ferns growing. You can see some of the detail on these large window frames that kind of fold over the roof and give you an incredible view of the forest beyond. This is a kitchen, so you get the sense of scale with a stove and a faucet. This is the main entrance here. You go up this ramp under this cowl to enter through this door. And the last project I'm going to show, the last couple of minutes here, is a project which we spent about a year and a half working on for a competition for a desert resort in the Middle East. The one that's being built is by Jean Nouvel, so ours isn't going to be built. Jean Nouvel's is going to be built, and he did a really awesome scheme, which is all public information right now, so you can look his up if you'd like to learn more about it. But we spent so much time and did so much research on this project with this idea of high resolution that we're doing a 500-page book just on this project. So a 500-page book on a project that lost a competition, and hopefully you'll all buy it. It should be out early next year. The project was for a desert resort in a desert thousands of miles wide, very, very remote. You could probably guess where it is, but I can't tell you too many details about it. But just know that, you know, we had an idea that the only way to get to this desert resort like Jean Nouvel's is by a dune buggy, because there's no infrastructure and there's no roads. So you fly into this nearby town and you drive to a station where you change from a car to a dune buggy, and then you drive to our resort. And to drive to our resort, we wanted there to be key visual points that the resort revealed itself over time. It was all about these views. Each room had a view out to the desert, which is why it took on this kind of broken up quality, because it's built into this. It's built not on top of this, but into this rock formation that we called the hand. It kind of looks like a hand. So one of the first glimpses you get is this almost like mystical, magical town embedded in this deep ravine in this rocky area where the architecture is also built into the rocks. And you can see it also takes on a kind of ancient looking quality. This area of the world has a particularly ancient civilization, Nabatean civilization, the same civilization that built Petra in Jordan. So a lot of carving into rocks. Here you can see the center core of our complex. We again wanted the circulation to be very rich, so you never just go up and down between levels. In this lower pool level, you have a kind of garden oasis, an arcade, a chilled pool, a regular torrential pool built into rocks, which are already there. Circulation up through certain pavilions, up through certain towers. This tower is a filtration tower, but also an observation tower, so you can go up in it and look around. The other side of this centralized core, this is the other side of these same pools, has the same arcade for shade, where you go up and, you know, there's little nooks and little like hidden areas for relaxation. This is a spa, which looks out over the pool. And then this is the entrance to a women's only pool area. And you can see the rocks that this whole thing is kind of embedded into. Even the pool is embedded into the rocky outcroppings. But this was another project where we used a lot of history. And this area of the world has a lot of different civilizations that have a lot of different historic traditions, mostly dealing with patterns because it's Islamic. So what we did was we took a lot of this pattern information and converted it into these two-dimensional drawings, and then started to use artificial intelligence to blend these patterns together. So this is the first project where we were using artificial intelligence combined with historic patterning to develop high-resolution architectural effects that somehow resonate with the region that the architecture is in. So these are just some of the artificial intelligence results we got by blending these different patterns. Some of these were used, some of them won't, but all of them are featured in the book. It's basically why we did this book, because we generated so much material just because it was so interesting, and artificial intelligence allowed us to design a lot more than we normally would. The way we design aesthetically in the office is that we do iterations. So we'll do 50 iterations of a facade with different high resolution strategies or different artificial intelligence strategies, and really pick the one that resonates best with us in aesthetic terms. Which one looks like it belongs in that area, or which one is the most beautiful, or which one looks like it has the right texture for plants, or which one has the right colors for the surrounding that we want. You can see this blends some kind of like Arabic writing with some vaulting and tiling into a flat facade, which takes on a really unusual quality. This is an artificial intelligence output based on this kind of like networking and stitching, very much based on weaving and clothing. This is one which we actually converted into architecture, so I want you to keep this one in your mind. This is another one which was artificial intelligence combining different historic writing styles from different civilizations. So this has writing from civilizations spanning 1,000 years, but it doesn't say anything. But it looks like writing. It looks like historic writing, but it's not writing of any particular culture. It just has a high resolution quality that's based on writing. This one has high resolution quality based on mixing different historic artifacts and patterns. Also, we use this one. We took some of these patterns and made them into what we call deep 2D. So these are all facades, but they're not flat. They have a couple feet of depth to them. In this environment, because it's in a desert, we wanted shading. Obviously, if you make a thick facade with a lot of horizontal members, you get a lot of shading benefits. So all of the artificial intelligence we didn't stop at 2D, we took it into 3 dimensions. And these are some of the facade languages that we used for our different building types. Some of them used, like rather simple construction. And then the more important areas got these artificial intelligence blended facades, like this upper observation tower. This was the main reception cube, and you see it gets a very highly detailed side based on these different pattern combinations, mixed with very low resolution stone chiseling. So it's partially ancient, partially very, very, very high tech, but all done out of solid stone. Here you can see the ceremonial entrance where you would walk up through that pavilion, which has a rich detail offset by, an existing rock. So you get very high resolution architecture next to very low resolution, like existing rock, next to kind of medium resolution, which is carved giant rocks that form a support for this. So you can think of walking through this resort as a kind of constant back and forth between high resolution, again, intended to bring and keep architecture at the foreground of your attention. This is the main tower, which again was based on this artificial intelligence result. So you should be able to see that sympathy pretty clearly in that design. This is one of the arcades next to the pool where we used that writing language to form a new kind of language of vaulting, the surface of which gets a kind of gold treatment. So it's based on historic patterns in writing, but it doesn't say anything, and it's not using a particular historic pattern. It's historical without being postmodern use of history. The rooms were all embedded into the rocks. This is the actual view of one of those rooms, a photograph that I took from where this room would actually be. You get certain color reliefs from tiled buildings placed in the landscape. This is a canopy that covers the garden oasis, which is also used. It has a really high sustainability aspect to the project. This is what they call a lunar radiator. So during the daytime, the space is air conditioned, and all the air conditioning basically heats up water, because when you're, air conditioning is removing heat from the air, you put that heat in the water, you store it in a tank, And then at night, you pump it through this giant radiator, and it emits its heat into the night sky, because the night sky is cooler than the day sky, right? So the heat has somewhere to dissipate high above the desert resort. And what this means is you don't need air conditioning fans, because fans are what are used to blow heat out into the atmosphere. But if we use this technology of containing the heat in water and then pumping it and radiating it out into the night sky, you don't need fans, which means you have a quiet resort, right? There's no air conditioning sound. And these are some of the other AI experiments that became different pavilions for different uses. You can see some of them were much more rustic in their quality, in how they were carved out of the sandstone. Some of them were a little bit more refined. We went through a lot of different facade studies. This is a lot of what's in the book. A lot of really highly detailed. This would be carved by CNC, CNC carved stone panels using stone that was actually found on site. This is the astronomy center, where you can go look at stars in the night sky, because it's in a desert so far from any cities. You have some of the best views of the nighttime sky of anywhere on Earth. So in this resort, you kind of hike up to this highest point, which is the where you basically can take a telescope outside of this little warming hut that has like sky maps and things. But because it's the highest point, we gave it the highest level of detail. This is another pavilion placed out in the desert, which is much more rustic, essentially a shade pavilion with water and food. Related to this project were some viewing platforms for tourism. This is one of the ones we designed. This was in a very windy area, so we designed it to be cylindrical, so it would shed wind. The wind would always go around it, which is why it has all of these wind protection areas. So this is where you end up on the viewing platform, but you're protected from the wind, which primarily comes from this direction. So it's kind of a cylindrical language that is a little bit different than the language that we use from the resort. It's like a more remote, more robust, less detailed language. In a sense, resolution is provided through the geometry rather than the skin articulation. And the farther you get from the core of that resort, the more rustic the buildings become. So this is actually, each of these floors is a room built into the side of the mountain, made with really, really chunky stone and carved with very kind of chunky, historic AI produced detail. This is one of those rooms. You can see carving into the existing rock and kind of polishing it to take advantage of some of its sandstone, beautiful sandstone effects. This again is the actual view outside of this room, because I actually stood here and took this photograph. And then we did a 3D printed model in solid brass. This is that main tower. This is the area of reception. This is the pool. This is that astronomy center. And then the rooms are all in these carved out of the kind of more brown foam. So all of the buildings that were 3D printed in brass were public areas, and all of the ones that were milled in foam were the private room areas. We also carved things like a restaurant into the rock. So you walk through this rock to get to this restaurant. And inside the rock, we're interested in carving these patterns for the ceiling, which I'll show you. This is the main reception drop-off. So you pull up in your dune buggy, you get out and you walk over this little bridge that has a little bit of water to provide an evaporative cooling effect. These are bent glass, which are ribbed to look almost like a kind of waterfall. So light would hit it and reflect and refract into this pool. So it'd be this really beautiful oasis-like environment that would kind of, I guess, emotionally cool you off before you entered this air-conditioned reception pavilion, which is where you check in and get your key and stuff. So this is the main door. This is a section through that reception pavilion that uses some of those AI techniques, but starts introducing color and tile. So there's a company called Bizaza that you provide an image to, like a JPEG image, and they have a robot that just places different tiles. So we can actually get something this detailed not very expensively just by printing gold and different green tiles. This is the reception counter. Here's a scale person, the receptionist. Here's someone who just left their dune buggy. And you can see it's right next to these giant rock formations. We used green because there's not a lot of green in the desert. So we wanted this experience to go from having just come on this really long journey to get here to this kind of really refined but robust solid stone exterior to this riot of green lush color, which is so unusual in the desert. And this is the last image I'll show, which is the carved ceiling of that restaurant. We were interested in using something historic like coffering and domes, but trying to find a way that we could organize coffering and domes through fractals and AI to produce a different language of interior, which is something that we're working on now in some other projects. So all of the intelligence doesn't only stay on the exterior like it did in earlier projects. We're trying to find ways to stretch that experience of high resolution into architectural interiors, in addition to all the work that we've been doing with technology and facades and detail. So this is the last slide. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you'd like. I think I should stop sharing my screen here. Okay, I see clapping, that's good. Is my screen still sharing? I can't hear you guys right now, so I don't know if you're saying anything. Hold on.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't see me.
But I don't see you, yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna start with a few questions with the people present here at the auditorium.
Okay,
So,
can you guys see me, or is my presentation still up?
we can see. No. Can
Let's
you
just
stop,
close-
can
let's
you
just
stop
close-
sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm looking for that option. It's disappeared. Let's see, hold on.
It's fine. We were able to put you in full screen, so don't worry.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, I've stopped sharing now. So start video. All right, so can you see me now?
Yes, we can see you. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone that's following online can ask the questions in the chat, and people present here could. So we're gonna start with the auditorium.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you. The lecture was actually very eye-opening to a lot of concepts and maybe theories even.
So
my
you're
main
saying
que-
it came to the foreground of your attention.
Yes, exactly. My
Mission
main
accomplished.
question was, yeah, it's about the term in high definition. Even though it was, as I said, very eye-opening and maybe even awe-inspiring in some places to see the visual results of this high definition. Can this high definition be achieved without the historical bagage that you have with you in the places where you are applying it? Because as we see, there's always some type of historical context that's setting the basis for the high definition. So what if we were put in a place where we have to search for a meaning for high definition, where history is not helping us or where the context is not helping us?
Yeah, I would say the projects like the Helsinki project didn't have any references to Helsinki. They were just random objects. And certainly I think the kind of fractal language that we used on the Center for Science and Innovation or some of the other projects like some of those small houses don't always use history. There's no connection between Lithuania and fractals, right? Or Lithuania and higher end mathematics. So I think I mean, I don't think history is required necessarily for high resolution architecture. It's just I happen to be really interested in history, and I have an interest in, using the history of a place to make things more meaningful. I travel a lot, somewhere shy of not quite 100 countries. I've been to like North Korea. I've been to some really weird places, and I can say that most places are just phenomenally boring, because a lot of places have just been, mid to late 20th century cities where every building is just a crappy glass box, and the airport all has a Marriott next to it, and there's a Starbucks everywhere. And cities, especially cities built in the mid to late 20th century, all have a very similar character, and none of that character has anything to do with the place where that is. And I've never been to Beirut, but I would imagine from pictures I've seen, it looks pretty beautiful in areas, and probably has some architectural traditions. It doesn't look like a generic city, but I've encountered too many generic cities to be interested in doing an architecture that's generic, but that may not be the right answer for everyone. I just like to lock my work into a sense of place, maybe more so than the next architect.
Yes, it's definitely thought-provoking, and I think that that's just enough to say that it works in a sense, at least. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi. Can
Hello.
you hear me?
Sure.
Hi. So my name is Rami. I'm a thesis student here at Alba. As it happens, I'm also working with AI in my thesis project. And well, the first thing that comes to mind is basically oftentimes when we're working with iterations and specifically with style transfers in your last project, there comes a time where you're gonna need in the end to select or elect some visuals or some artifacts. And I feel like each architect has his own parameters to do such elections. So I just wanted to inquire on your thoughts, or your own parameters that you're using by means of electing a certain byproduct to use in your final.
It's interesting because that question, in a sense, shows, I mean, not your fault, but it shows a little bit of the bias of how modern architecture impacted architecture. That to have a facade like I'm showing, you kind of need to have a reason, or you need to it's much easier for architects if I say the facade is for growing plants on. That's why it has ledges. They're like, oh, yes, 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 of course, of course. But if I say I did this facade because I think it looks great, they're like, no, 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 no. There must be a reason. You must have a reason. It can't just be because it looks right. But I mean, the thing about aesthetics is that it's about perception. And I think, and this may be pretentious of me, but architect, I mean, you're close to Greece. I'm sure some of you speak Greek, but archi, means master, and tecton means builder. So architect means master builder. It doesn't mean shitty builder. So architects should have some kind of, ability to aesthetically, build and choose and design things that are better than everyone else, which is why I think we need a little bit more aesthetic discussion in schools, because everyone, you guys would get murdered if you just went up and presented a project and said, this is my project, I did it, and I just thought it looks amazing. Thank you very much. Like, you'd probably fail, But I also think your question about how you select the right one, I always use an analogy of making chili. Like, I don't know if you guys know what chili is, but it's like a stew here in the United States. Everyone makes a big deal about it. I'm sure there's some Lebanese version of a stew that all of your mothers make. But, you know, you ask your mother, like, how does she know when the stew is ready? You know, she's not like, well, you know, I calculated the sun angle and it hits the lid and reflects properly, so I know that I'm getting maximum sun exposure for the surface tension area. Or you don't say, well, my mom says, well, I looked at the molecules and they're binding properly, and so chemically it's doing exactly what I want. No, she tastes the fucking stew. Sorry to cuss. But, you know, architecture is just like, you know, you're just tasting things with your eyes. So when you're doing AI, you just look at something and it needs a little more of something. You add a little bit of something. And how does your mom know when the stew's done? It tastes right. How does an architect know when a facade is done? It looks right. I don't think architects need excuses and parameters to justify every single aspect of their project. Like, architects should have some freedom, and I call that an alibi. Like, you don't need an alibi for every move you make, which is why I think, you know, as much as I like some of the buildings he's done, I think Bjarke Ingels has done a lot of damage to architecture, because now students all need some little diagram, you know, with a little sun and a little arrow, and you pull up the corner of the building and the sun hits the window, as if to say, like, I put a window here so sunlight can get in, and you need to diagram that. Like, you have to diagram every little move, so people are like, oh, yes, yes, of course, the building needs sunlight. It makes perfect sense you would put a window there. But if you said, I put a window there because there's a nice view looking out and it looks good on the facade, people would be like, no, you must not put a window there for that reason. You must have a diagram. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, and I don't know what the culture of your school is like, but architecture students are much safer when they can justify a decision because of a diagram, rather than they said they made the decision because they thought it was right. And I think we need to train architects to do things just because they think it's right. And I think aesthetics is a discourse that can help in those types of decisions, because you all make decisions aesthetically, you just don't talk about it. You work on your project and change it till it looks right. And then you make up an excuse about sunlight or program to justify that decision. And you all know you do it. So you're not kidding anyone. We need to be able to talk about aesthetics in architecture school and in architecture.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have another question? No.
There's a good question in the text about high cost and cost over design and carbon footprint that I wouldn't mind answering. Can I answer that one?
I think let's finish with the auditorium, then we'll pass to the
Oh,
chat to
okay.
stay a bit structured.
Okay.
So does yeah.
Hello,
Hello.
can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you.
So I will try to rebound on your last statement, and I would love to have a clarification about the relation between aesthetics and politics. So how would you redefine this to us and go deeper into a certain definition or relation, while reflecting it on a special act or so?
Yep. Well,
Yeah. There is a book.
Aesthetics
All right.
equals politics, right? So aesthetics, you know, as I started off with that graph in the beginning, as of 2016, architecture for the majority of humans defines what reality looks like. And if you're in charge of defining what reality looks like, does that have a political dimension? And I don't think anyone here would say, oh, yes, this person over here is responsible for designing what reality looks like, but they have no political power. Right? So we know just from common sense that the design of the physical framework of human reality is political. Even where I choose to put a door and who I let in with that door is a political act. Doors are designed to keep people out and other people in, and keeping people out and in is the same thing that borders do. And borders are the most political features in human history, right? Politics is largely about people keeping people in and out. And I think aesthetics has the capacity to also invite people in or invite people out, right? There's, I'm sure you've all been, or some of you have been on tourist visits to other cities. And I mean, it's really, and this is going to be a kind of simplistic answer, but it's really no accident that tourists visit the historic city centers of Paris, for instance, right? People don't go out into the, people generally don't go visit the suburbs of Paris, Americans don't have like, oh, it's my dream to go to the suburbs of Paris, I've just always wanted to see La Défense, they want to go to Paris, and they want to go to Paris because it's beautiful. And there was a much greater attention on aesthetics and in particular beauty. That's not the only way to address aesthetics, beauty, but because those environments are inviting and welcoming and culturally, they feel better to the human body and the human psyche. And I'm sure Beirut has those types of environments as well. And designing environments to be welcoming or not welcoming is an aesthetic, therefore is an aesthetic act, right? And we just never talk about that in architecture. And I don't have all the answers, but I would like architects to start asking the questions and start talking about that aspect of things, about who is this building for? Who does this building or does this urban space welcome? Who does it not welcome? Is that okay? Is that what we want? Do we want to change that aesthetic to be more welcoming or less welcoming? So, the book is all about that. There's also other ideas in the book that link aesthetics. Another is that the distance we have to understanding of a building. Like if I'm in Beirut and you have a building which is a particularly Lebanese building, and you know all the symbolism and all about the history, and I know nothing about it, then that's kind of bias against me. But if someone does a building that is like more mysterious and more unknown and more unfamiliar, we have equal distance and relationship to that. So there is some equalizing force in what something I didn't really talk about is Victor Shklovsky's work on estrangement, but in creating architecture that defamiliarizes your sense of reality can have an equalizing pressure in a community because everyone has equal access to that building.
Thank you.
I should have done this before, but the person that asked the question is our professor of experimental design studios, and he's actually the person that introduced you to us.
Oh,
So
great! Thank you.
So the lecture is
I'll send you a check.
So the lecture is possible today thanks to him. So
yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. Nice to meet you.
So we're going to start with the questions in the chat with the first one, which says high definition equals high cost, cost over design and carbon footprint. So would you like to answer this question?
High definition equals high cost. I don't really believe, I mean, that certainly can be the case. It's not always the case. I showed you that project for the concrete paneled small residential building. And the way they make those precast, I mean, it's very nice concrete. It's like kind of a cast stone. But the way they make those is that, they pour a liquid mixture into a pan, essentially, and let it dry and pull out the panel, right? So that panel can have a flat bottom, in which case the concrete panel is flat, or the bottom of that pan can have figures in it, in which case the front of the panel has figures. And if you're manufacturing that pan once and you get 1,000 panels off it, it's not really that much more expensive to make that initial pan. It's not like you have to carve 1,000 panels of concrete or stone with highly intricate statues and stuff. You're just making a slightly better pan to make 100 or 1,000 different panels. So technology, the other aspect of that is that I didn't really talk about a lot, like CNC technologies can carve things overnight that would have taken a historic carpenter a year to do, right? So we have access to robotics, and robotics are drastically bring down the cost of things like carvings and detail. As far as carbon footprint, I just read this morning that there's a building being taken down in New York City. And this is a particular problem in America, that America tends to build buildings to last about 30 years. And one thing we never talk in our arguments about sustainability is aesthetics. We talk about sustainability, whether a building has zero net emissions, or you choose carpet that doesn't off gas, or you use recycled bamboo. But we never talk about whether a building is beautiful. I mean, the buildings that are the most beautiful are the ones that are cared for the most by a community. So I think there has to be some aspect on sustainability that asks a question about aesthetic value. Because you have to ask, if you're sustaining something, you have to ask, what are you sustaining? Do people want to sustain downtown Houston for the next 200 years, which is one of the ugliest cities on earth? Or do we want to sustain, Paris for the next 200 years? Like, I think we need to think about why people tear buildings down, and why buildings are hated, and why buildings don't last for hundreds of years. And some of that, not all of that, is programmatic, and some of that, but not all of that, is aesthetic. We never talk about the aesthetic part. So I think maybe thinking about the buildings and how they're welcoming to people, or fit within a community, or fit within history, which is one of my interests, changes how a building is cherished by a community, how a building is valued by a community. And I think buildings are valued and cherished by a community because of largely their aesthetic qualities. Like, I don't think any of your mothers has been walking through wherever you're from and they're like, oh, honey, that building, I just love that building. Look at that program arrangement. It's incredible. I'm going to take a picture of that building for its program arrangement, and I'm going to post it on Instagram. When you go visit other cities, when do you pick up your camera? My friend Elaine Scary, who's a kind of theorist of beauty, says, when you choose to sketch things, it's almost always a beautiful thing. When you choose to take photographs of things, it's almost always a beautiful thing. When you change your picture before you post it on Instagram, you're generally just making it more beautiful. You're like, touching up your skin a little bit, making yourself a little thinner, whatever filter makes you look best. You're trying to make your images more beautiful. So there's an innate human ability to deal with aesthetics on Instagram that nobody has a problem with. And everyone does every day if you choose filters. But no one would ever talk about that in architecture, because that's heresy, because architecture is about more serious things than aesthetics. It's about function, So I just think we need to be able to talk about aesthetics in architecture in the same way that we use aesthetics in every other aspect of our lives. And I think that the aesthetic qualities of buildings are their cultural qualities, which give them value in a community, which is why communities want to sustain them in the first place.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Karim that says, in an efficiency and economy-driven world, how do you convince your clients that your way is the way of doing architecture and not the regular old glass box? It seems evident for us students that aesthetics have a big role to play in experiencing architecture, but how do you convince, say, a contractor of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the ultimate question. I'm looking outside of my I'll just show you. I'm looking outside my window here at Lower Manhattan, and you can see the World Trade Center there, and there's a building by Frank Gehry, which is, I don't know, kind of hard for me to point to right now, but let me see if I can do it. Right there, that tall one, building by Frank Gehry. So get back to me. That building by Frank Gehry is very much in a Frank Gehry style. Beautiful, rippling steel facade, beautiful angled windows. And it's not an expensive building. It's a rental building. It's not like a bunch of billionaires live there. It's not like they spent a ton of money to build it. It's just that he's used technology, and he was an early advocate of CATIA, which kind of became BIM. And that building had no change orders because, he designed it so specifically and worked with the companies so closely that there weren't mistakes that they had to go back and change after construction. So that building ended up being the same cost per square foot as most of the other buildings down there that also house residential units. So there's a lot of inefficiency in what we do today in construction because of laziness. And I think we can turn a lot of that inefficiency into maybe more money that could be spent on the architecture. But the fact that Frank Gehry, probably people think he's one of the most expensive architects in the world. He's really not. And that's why he gets a lot of those things built, because he figures out ways to get them built. Now, my work is probably pushing the envelope on that cost a little bit more because my office is, at least at this point in time, as much about speculation and pushing the envelope as it is about building. But anytime someone says, like, you're not an architect because you're not building something, you just wait 20 years. Like Zaha Hadid, everyone for the first 55 years of her career was like, you're not an architect, you haven't built anything. And then when she turned 55, she won the Pritzker Prize. I knew her then. And, when I first met her, her firm had 11 people in it. And all of a sudden she got the Pritzker Prize. Her firm went up to 300 people, and she's building projects in every country in the world right now. So all of that work also wasn't buildable 20 years ago. And then all of a sudden a technology comes along and it becomes instantly buildable. So I kind of think technological innovation services architects so that we just be able to need to engage with it in a way that allows us to give clients what they want on the budgets that they have. I think it's unlikely that you're going to convince a client to double their budget. I think it's more likely that you figure out a way to do what you want to do. Bad architects, I would say, just take their BIM model, drag and drop curtain walls, and are kind of done with it. And that's because that architect wants to make money. You only make money at architecture by spending as little time as possible on design, right? Because you get paid a certain amount of money to do a building, and any time you spent on design is just chipping away at hours. So, you can't shorten the time it takes for construction documents by that much. You can't shorten the time it takes to meet clients. You can dramatically shorten the time it takes to design a building. So it takes me a year to design that resort. I'm sure there's a firm that could just throw together some resort details and design it in 2 or 3 days. And if a company gives me an amount of money and gives that other firm an amount of money, I'm going to lose money on the project. They're going to make money on the project. So I think you just got to be a good architect and be willing to put in design and put in effort in order to get kind of cultural value out of your projects. Because architects are just as guilty as being greedy capitalists as everyone else.
Okay, thank you. We still have 3 questions in the chat. So what do you suggest we finish with the 3 questions?
Okay.
We're done. Okay, so we have a question from Thierry that says, could you tell us more about the thought process behind the house on Ile René Levasseur? Maybe it's more a question about ecology in an object-oriented sense.
That project is in a very, very remote area, and it would have been impossible to do a kind of modernist glass box because there's no access to maintenance. You couldn't do, you know, like a Sejima project or a Mies van der Rohe project or something that has to be clean all the time. Or so that project had to be maintenance free. And the way we wanted to make it maintenance free was to lift it up off the ground. So if there's any flooding or plant growth or earthquakes or animals, you know, it's elevated off the ground. And the walls are, you know, like almost 2 feet thick, and a lot of that is stone. So it would take 1,000 years for that building to wear, much like, you know, the Roman ruins or something. That building was designed to be forest proof, nature proof, cleaning proof. Like it was designed to accommodate dirt, so it would never need to be cleaned. The window frames weren't made out of wood that they need to be replaced. They were made out of bronze, and bronze is the material that would last. If humans died, the last material to disintegrate would be bronze. It's basically the most long-lived material that humans can make. So, and it's not actually that expensive to use as an architectural material, but the window frames were all bronze, so they would never need to be repainted. They would never rot. They would be there 1,000 years from now. So that project was all about a kind of fortification against nature and allowing nature to overrun it, which is why it has that kind of chunky, ruined, heavy look to it, which is very different than some of the more delicate, you know, project in France that you know would take a lot more maintenance. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, another question from Mariam. Could you see your high definition or fractal maximalist approach to design being used to completely merge with your environment instead of standing out?
Oh yeah, totally. I just, you know, I have a big ego and I want my building to, no, I'm just kidding. No, I'm not really kidding, but you know, you know, when we get a program in the office, you know, it's for a building, you know, but I think I've been working with these high resolution in history, but I am interested in thinking how ecology fits into that equation, and that house on Ile-René Lavoisier is a part of that. But I'm actually teaching an ecological studio at Yale next semester called Eco-Surrealism, where we're going to look at that kind of relationship and try to break down those boundaries between architecture and ecology. So it's definitely something that's on my mind. I haven't really engaged it in a lot of projects yet, but the answer is absolutely yes. I think all of these technologies, you know, I'm just like that. I think there's a lot to be explored. There's a lot of discovery to be made if we think about architecture and how to make architecture that isn't abstract. I mean, we've been doing abstract modernist boxes for 100 years, and all high resolution is the opposite of abstract. So I think there's probably a million ways to do high resolution architecture that I haven't even thought of, that your generation might think of now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. But it's really just not being willing to do abstract boxes because they're cheap. And I just call the opposite of that high resolution.
Okay, thank you. So the final question from the chat is from Sarah. Architecture that redefines our sense, perception, and connection to reality will do their job for a certain period of time. Then what?
Architecture that redefines our sense, perception, and connection to reality will do their job only for a certain period of time. Then what? You're saying, like, in a sense, the novelty wears off, right? There's something. It's like movies, you know. I watch movies. I'm sure you watch movies, and I'm sure there's movies that you've watched multiple times, and there's movies that you've watched once and never again. And has anyone in the audience ever watched a movie more than once? Just like raise your hand a little. Oh, okay. So you knew it was going to happen the second time you watched it, right? It's because you found something in that movie other than novelty. The first time you watched it, it was novelty. You didn't know how the plot was going to unfold. You didn't know what the next scenes were going to be like, but you watched it again because it had something other than novelty. And I hope my work has something other than novelty as well, that yes, you experience the novelty, but maybe the beauty lasts. Or maybe the relationship with the historic culture lasts, or, you know, some aspect of it. Like I wouldn't want a world where every building is just about novelty, and which is why I'm interested in history, because I think that's a way to lock it into a kind of community and culture, but that's not necessarily the only way. But my position really isn't to advocate for novelty. Otherwise, every building would just be weirder than the last building, which I think doesn't make for very good cities either, you know.
Okay, so would you mind to take one last question, or actually, yeah,
Sure.
just one last question there in the chat. There's Joe that asks if what's your thoughts on the metaverse and its implications on architecture?
Well, you know, I've had a lot of experience with virtual reality because we did that project for Virtual Reality World, and I'm a part owner of the company, and so I'm pretty well versed in that. And you know, I think there's architects that, you know, say the world will eventually be like Ready Player One, where you spend a lot of time in the digital universe. Certainly, you all and me spend a lot of time on our phones. You know, probably, I don't know, how many hours a day do you spend on your phone looking at TikTok and Instagram and pictures of food and watching YouTube and movies and whatever. I think that architecture's strength is that it can't be digitized, right? Architecture has a third dimension, and you can't collapse a third dimension into a computer file. You can collapse a painting pretty easily and get the qualities of the painting on your screen, but architecture is really actually quite digital resistant, because it requires, as Graham Harman says, it requires time. You can't understand architecture by looking at a picture of it. You need to walk around a building, right? You can't ever understand a building just by a single picture. You have to experience it over time from different angles and different perspectives. So in that sense, it's like music, you know. If I take Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and I compress it into a 5-second clip, you're not going to listen to it, right? It's not going to sound like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, even though it's the same symphony, just compressed and played faster. And I think the same is true with architecture. You can experience architecture, you can compress it into an image, but that's not the same as experiencing architecture. So I think architecture is maybe the coolest thing in a world where everyone spends all their time looking at phones, because it's the only thing that can't be shoved into a phone or shoved into a virtual reality screen. I think that makes it more important as the rest of the world becomes digitized and virtualized. Architecture is always going to demand a presence in the real world, and I think that's going to make it more special, not less special.
خبصة. الساعة 6. C'est chez lui.
Are you still there? I lost your images. Okay.
Hi, we can see it again. Electricity cut.
Oh, got it. Okay.
لا عم بسألك إذا عندك. Okay, so does anyone have a final question or something to say? خلاص? Okay. So would you like to add something to end the lecture?
I mean, not much. It's been a real pleasure. I mean, I really enjoy talking about these ideas, and you know, the way teaching works is, you know, maybe your teachers don't talk about this, but you know, in any studio, there's a couple students which will take your ideas more seriously than other students. So, you know, in a room full of 20 or 30 people, you know, maybe some of these ideas impact a couple of you more than others. And, you know, it's my hope that, you know, I see your work in the world in the near future. I mean, one of the great aspects about what my friends and I do is that we tend to work in discourses that are new within architecture. We work with new technologies, we work with new ideas, we work with new philosophies. That means there's not a history of it, which means that you as students doing this work, if you want to, you get to participate in architecture culture directly as a student because no one else is doing it. And your professors with, you know, they may know a little bit more about this stuff, but there's not a body of information on high resolution architecture that you can't take a class, fill a class with information on high resolution architecture. It's a small set of ideas working on by a small set of people. And as a student, you can engage that immediately. It's not like you have to wait to become an architect to become part of architectural discourse. You know, you can be a pioneer as a student because it's such uncharted territory. And I find that really exciting. And it's one of the reasons I lecture so much, because I find, you know, that every couple of years, you know, a student will come up to me and be like, oh, your, you know, lecturer introduced me to the idea of this, and I've been doing this work. And, you know, you just see little ripples of maybe some of your ideas that got changed by other people and went out into the world. So I think the exchange of ideas is the most important thing in education. So this I would constitute as an exchange of ideas, and I've enjoyed it very much. And good luck trying to do your projects without diagrams.
Thank you so much for lecturing.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
The pleasure is ours. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. We're in your future. So
You too.
it's not
Bye, everybody.